Thank you for having us today. It's been a really exciting, interesting day, so we're really happy to be here. And today we are here to talk about how we've worked to foster a culture of collaboration and a community of practitioners to support the GovUK design system. So yeah, as Sergi said, hi, my name is Ignacia. I work in government, and I specifically work in the Government Digital Service, or GDS. I'm a service designer, and I've been working there for the past 2.5 years. And I worked on the GovUK design system team for 1 year. And now I'm currently working on the gov.uk platform website, helping users find things and complete tasks using GovUK.
Oh, sorry. Doing the click around.
Sorry.
That's okay. So, yeah, and I'm Amy, and I, as Sergey said, I spent 3 years working as content lead for the GovUK design system, and now I work for myself as a contractor at Babylon Health, and I'm product managing the design system over there. And just to say now, if I forget anything in this talk, this guy is going to have to come up here because I think he knows everything. So, yeah, so we first met at the Government Digital Service, or GDS, and for anyone who isn't familiar with it, GDS is part of the Cabinet Office, and its main goal is to host and maintain gov.uk, which is the website for the UK government. And specifically, we work together on the design system for gov.uk. So the design system is a publicly available, centralised and standardised set of representative design resources, which is there to help teams across government to build services for gov.uk. And specifically, it contains 3 products. So there's the design system website, which is publicly available, and it contains the styles, components, and patterns that teams need to make services that look and behave the way that gov.uk should. So things like colour palettes, headers, footers, layouts, and styles for typography and forms. And it also contains guidance for tasks like helping users to enter their name or helping them create an account. Then there's also the GovUK Prototype Kit, which is a prototyping tool that allows designers to make high-fidelity working prototypes that they can try out in user research before they take things into production. And finally, there's GovUK Frontend, which is an accessible, responsive front-end framework that developers can use to build government services. But these are just the most visible aspects of the GovUK design system, and just as important is the community that sits around it. So to be a success, it really needs to incorporate the latest research, experience, design, and development from the whole community. And for this reason, we needed people from across government to come together to help us to build it and design it, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to hand over to Ignacia now, who's going to start to talk about how we did that.
I think I'd rather use this. Cool. So, what does a good community look like? What are the enablers to building a strong community? So these are some of the principles grounded from the things that Amy and I learned while working on the GovUK design system. So this is what we think and our experience. To build a strong community, be collaborative, be open, be available, be inclusive, and be relentless. So we're going to talk you through these principles and share some examples of how we applied it to the GovUK design system. So I'm going to start with being collaborative. By having a collaborative approach in the creation of your products and services, it will help make those things, whatever you design or build, more useful and more representative for your users. It will help you build trust, and therefore it will increase the adoption of those products and services. And it will also help strengthen the community by empowering them in the shaping of those products and services. But most importantly, collaboration starts from even before you have a finished product. So collaborating well means involving users and stakeholders early on in the process of shaping your products and services and what's in it. So things that are developed without the right representation and diversity from across government in this case, we risk making things that exclude users or that don't ultimately work for them. So in short, don't design it for them, design it with them. And now I'm going to share 3 examples of how we've done this with the GovUK design system. So here's one example of how we've been working with a wider community across government, even before we had a system at all. So while we were in private beta, we were building the design system website, we realized that people from across government still were creating patterns and components and bespoke things on their own and in silos. Government is huge, we have 25 different departments. So there was no visibility of what teams were working on. And therefore, duplication of effort continued to happen. People kept building, again, the same solutions to the same problems. So what we tried to do was to co-create a community backlog to raise visibility of all the work around patterns and components that were happening across government. So how did we do this? We did this by running cross-government workshops where we brought together stakeholders and potential users of the design system from different disciplines and departments from across government into one room to look at all the things that we would need to build for government. To understand each other's context, to understand each other's challenges, our different user needs for the different departments, and also to see the areas of overlap in our work. So from the back of this workshop, we created our community backlog of all these things that we need to build in government. And this was co-created with designers, content designers, and developers from 10 different departments that participated in these workshops. So this became a starting point for discussions and a place to share work in progress, user research, give feedback on components and patterns. And this is something that's still being used today. And to make a design system representative, we needed to allow people to contribute back to it. So we needed to establish a contribution and assurance process to support this. But we wanted to involve members of the wider community across government in the creation of this process. So we ran more workshops. We got stakeholders and users together again to co-design a process for contributing changes and improvements to the system. So by involving the expertise within the wider organization, they were able to help us shape different aspects of the service. They felt invested in what they were creating, as they had an important role to play within that. So we were empowering people to make changes, and this strengthened the community feeling around the GovUK design system. And an important aspect of our assurance model was to make it as democratic and representative as possible. So we established an external working group from different disciplines and different departments from across government to help us assure the things that would go into the design system. And this ensures that design system is community-led and not just GDS-led, which makes things far more fair and representative. And for this role, we had to establish the relationship between our central team in GDS and the working group. So we wanted to shift decision-making away from GDS. So we agreed that the working group would be the ones to ultimately decide what goes into the system. And they would give constructive feedback to contributors between their different expertise. And the role of our team was mainly to facilitate that process for them. And when a member of our team, the design system team, wants to contribute a new component or pattern, they have to go through the same assurance process as anyone from outside the team. So we stick to those rules as well. And finally, we've created community principles together. So we can all work towards the same goals, understand how different departments and disciplines can work better together, and gives the community a sense of shared values, which reminds me of the talk that Rachel just gave. And an example of one of those values that came out of these workshops was about thinking locally, but sharing globally. That means designing in context for specific user needs, but then looking for opportunities to share your work more widely for the benefit of others. So by taking a collaborative approach, there's a sense of co-ownership, responsibility, and investment in the community as they were part of the process of building it. In our experience, collaborating early on with potential users and stakeholders means that they end up being your biggest advocates. So, I've talked about the importance of collaboration, but to make good collaboration happen, we need to be open. This means sharing our work in progress, explaining and recording decision-making, and putting things out there for people to feedback and discuss. We learned that by making our work and decisions open, we make things better. It allows the community to get involved in improving the GovUK design system through feedback and discussions. And this transparency also helps build trust within the community. So the GovUK design system is an open source project. That means that all of our code is in the open and you can access it through GitHub. But we've gone beyond just the code, and we looked at how we can make things open across the entire system and the service that we provide. So one of the things we did is that we started to create a culture of open communication. So we've written blog posts, presentations like this, given show and tells, to share about the work that we're doing and the things that we've learned along the way. So anyone can go and have a look at what we've been to and what we're learning. And this is an example of a blog post Amy and I wrote about opening the design system for contribution. So all of that should be online, available for anyone to look at. Our discussions are in the open as well. Anyone can contribute to them. And the majority of these happen in our community backlog in GitHub. So people use this to share research and examples, ask questions, and propose improvements. In this way, the community can share knowledge amongst themselves and help to improve things over time in the design system. Our contribution process and our assurance process is also in the open. So we've created a section in the design system website for community, where we invite people to become part of this cross-government community, to contribute, to share research, or to just be part of the discussion. And all of our processes and standards are documented here, so anyone can have a look at as well. We've co-created a set of open standards. This is a set of criteria to help us assure the quality of the things that go into the design system. We publish them on the website, and it aims to set expectations for users and facilitate decision-making. So we make sure that decisions are fair, representative, and evidence-based. So when the working group gets together, it doesn't matter what department you come from, or if you're a content designer or a developer, we're assuring the things using these common and open standards, which you can also find in the design system website. And finally, we've made our decisions open as well. So we're making sure that decision-making is transparent by publishing all the results and recommendations from when the working group gets together and reviews a contribution. We publish everything in GitHub. So this helps people see the thinking behind the decisions and go and leave comments after this in the website. As a result of working in the open, we've enabled 200 and more members from across the community to contribute to this community backlog. They've shared things that have been designed within their own service teams. They've shared learnings from user research and user testing. And they've also contributed completely new components and patterns to the system. So out of those completely new things, 13 out of 18 have been contributed from outside the team. And they've been assured by members of the community. And as an important counterpart to being open is being available. So it's not enough to just make your processes and your products open, but you also need to be available to your users as maintainers of a project. So for us, this means providing continuous support to our users in the ways that they prefer. We've always prioritized support, and it's a very important investment for us. Having a team to provide support, being present in the different channels, and having regular touch points with the community, it all helps to know that this thing is supported and it keeps momentum in the community. So you won't see this, but it's just a layout of a process. We've created a support model for our team to support the community across different channels. So we put this process in place to make sure that we're addressing people's questions and challenges. We also run a regular training for the prototype kit that Amy mentioned in the beginning, and we work side by side with contributors to help them get things into the design system. We also have daily support rotas, so everyone in our team takes in turns to monitor across all of our communication channels and answer user questions. This gives us visibility on what government is working on, like across government, so we can easily connect people who are working on the same thing and help them to collaborate. And by doing this, it means that we reduce that duplication of effort over time. But it's not only about being there to respond to questions when people need help. It's also about proactive communication with the community. So one example of this is that for the past 3 years, we host a weekly call for anyone interested in creating components and patterns to prototype or build government services. We use this space to have conversations between designers, interaction designers, content designers, developers, heads or design leads, where we share working progress. We have design crits over this call. We talk about the challenges that we face, and we identify potential collaboration. So it becomes a support network. We help each other. And this has been very important to help build and maintain relationship with stakeholders and users. And this has been key for the building of this cross-government community over time. And finally, we also run big community workshops once or twice a year. And these are really good opportunities to meet people face-to-face from across the whole of government, build connections, and enable a place to craft things together. And there really isn't a substitute for real-life interaction. It makes all the difference, so we put a lot of effort into once or twice a year getting everyone in one space to work together. So as a summary, being available to your community of users will help you build trust, it'll keep momentum, and it also ultimately will drive adoption for those products and services that you're building because you're building it with them and you're available there to support them. Handing over to Amy now.
Thank you. Ignacia's talked about the work that we did in the GovUK design system team to make ourselves and the design system as open and visible as possible. And that's really important for making sure that people have the opportunity to participate in our work and to influence the outcomes. But making the work open and making the team available is just one part of that. Making things open alone isn't enough. It's also really important to be proactive about making it inclusive. And one of the main reasons that we prioritised supporting contribution to the design system in the first place is because we knew that it would help to make the design system and all the things it contained representative. So by inviting input from outside of our team, from people across government, we believed that we could create richer patterns based on a broader set of perspectives and contexts. But after a while, we started to notice that all the people who were taking the time to contribute to the design system were a bit samey. And there was a pretty noticeable lack of contribution from people of colour, from any white women, from disabled people, from transgender people, really from anyone who didn't look like these guys. And we started to worry that perhaps our design system wasn't shaping up to be as representative as we had hoped it would be. So we knew that we needed to do something about this problem, but we weren't quite sure where to start because we had a couple of problems. So the first thing is that while we suspected this was an issue, all of our assumptions about the lack of representation were based on superficial things like people's names and GitHub profile pictures, which obviously isn't ideal. So we didn't have any data to substantiate those assumptions. And then secondly, we didn't actually know why this was happening or what to do about it. So we decided to run some research to find out a bit more. And this research was led by our data analyst, whose name is Daisy Harper-Wayne, and our researcher, Rosie Clayton. And they sent out a survey through our mailing lists and our Slack channels, and they collected 124 different responses. And then they carried out in-depth user research interviews with 14 of those people to learn more about the answers that they gave. And our research showed that in order to contribute, people need to have 4 things available to them. They need to have time, confidence, motivation, and permission, or at the very least, the autonomy not to need that permission in the first place. And the chances of people having all of these things were much lower amongst underrepresented groups. So as an example, we learned that women and non-binary people were far less likely to have the confidence to contribute than men. And respondents aged 35 and over were more likely to be lacking in time to contribute than people in lower age brackets, often due to having children or other care commitments outside of work. So work to reduce these barriers is ongoing now, and it'll need to be continuous. This isn't something that you can just fix and then leave. But I can give you 3 examples of things that we did while we were on the team to try and support this work. So a really simple, straightforward thing that we did, which actually had a massive impact, was to expose that support rota system that Ignacia mentioned to our users. So we started posting in our Slack channel every morning to let people know which one of us was on support that day, and to tell them that they could send us a direct message if they preferred, if they didn't want to post their question publicly. So by taking away one of the big barriers to participating, we started to hear from a lot of people who hadn't engaged with us before. And even though we had tried to work really hard to make sure that our channels were inclusive and safe environments, for some people, the prospect of asking their question in public was just too intimidating. So this seemingly really small change empowered a lot more people to voice their opinions and to challenge our decisions and ask questions about our work. And then another barrier that we had to consider was a technical one. So we noticed that a lot of our direct contributions came from front-end developers or technically very confident interaction designers. And we manage our content and code using GitHub, as we've touched on. So that means that often people in less technical roles felt that they couldn't contribute or sort of didn't have the confidence to try. So we ran some training for content designers to teach them how to propose changes by opening pull requests and raising issues on GitHub. And we used the training materials from those sessions to turn into this guide, which is available on the Design System website. We then added a link to this guide at the bottom of every component and pattern page in the Design System so that people could easily get to the guidance and find out how to suggest a change. And we started to see a lot more first-time contributors off the back of this work, proving again that working to reduce barriers is essential for making things open and representative. And then finally, something else that we wanted to explore was whether we could use the experience of our more confident contributors to help other people to get involved in the work. So we asked Adam, who's an experienced interaction designer at the Ministry of Justice, who had contributed previously a couple of times, if he could work with some people in his team to develop a new pattern that he proposed. So he worked together with his content designer Amanda and their user researcher Gemma to produce the pattern. And the result of this work was 2 new first-time contributors, both working in disciplines that we didn't typically see contributing, which was content design and user research. And the pattern they produced, Ask Users for Their Bank Details, was probably one of the best that we'd ever seen. Having Amanda involved meant that the content and the guidance was user-centered and really clear. And having Gemma's input meant that the pattern was supported by really strong research. So the team wrote about their experience of contributing as a multidisciplinary team. And that blog post has been published on the MOJ Digital and Technology blog. So you can go and read more about that work if you want to. And these are just 3 examples of the actions that we took to try and make our community more inclusive. And I'm no longer at GDS, and Ignacia is now working in a different team, but we know this work is ongoing. But this work is never done. Building an inclusive community means that you're continuously needing to ask what barriers your users are facing and what you can do to try and reduce them. And that leads me quite nicely into our final principle for building a community, which is to be relentless. So even the very best design processes and the best documentation can't sustain a community on their own. And despite what we might think, communities are never self-sustaining. Behind any strong and well-functioning community, there's often a group of people working really hard behind the scenes to sustain that community, to keep things running and keep momentum. So I'll just expand on that a bit. After quite a lot of time spent designing and researching our contribution model, Ignacia and I decided that we really needed to sit down and document some of it. So we took ourselves out of the office, we went and sat in the coffee shop over the road, away from any distractions, and we turned all of our learnings and processes and standards into a set of step-by-step guides for our team, for potential contributors, and for members of the working group. We were really pleased with ourselves by the end of it, and we really look forward to our processes becoming more widely understood and followed, and contribution and assurance becoming much less of a burden to support than it had been. But it didn't quite work out as we'd hoped. Weeks, even months down the line, people were still coming to us and asking how to do things that were covered in our guides. And people were still contributing things that didn't meet our publicly available contribution standards. Even members of our own team were still missing steps in the process for facilitating working group review sessions or supporting contributors. And this was really frustrating and disappointing. We put so much time and energy into documenting our processes and our standards that to have people outright ignoring them felt really disheartening. It felt like a personal insult. But then we realised it's not that the guidance wasn't useful, it's just that it wasn't enough on its own. So documenting our processes and standards and making them open was critical for building trust and managing people's expectations. But expecting people to know them inside and out from day one, the way that we did, was just not realistic. We realised that we couldn't document our way out of providing hands-on support to our community, because hands-on support was a really important touch point with our community. It was actually one of the main reasons that we had a community in the first place. And so we just adjusted our expectations. The work of sustaining a community is endless and relentless, and you should expect to continually do things like provide support, communicate your work, bring people together to facilitate collaboration, and reduce barriers to make things inclusive. And it's important to accept that you'll never be done, because there will always be more to do on this front. And this is where we're going to finish up today. So I hope that between us we've managed to highlight the importance of making community a priority. For design systems in particular, community is really essential. It's not sufficient just to build a design system and leave it there to look after itself. You have to continue to grow and support and nourish the community that sits behind it. Because even if over time, all of the visible artifacts of your design system change, so your tools, your components, your pattern libraries, the community and the spirit of collaboration is what will sustain the value of your work over time and make sure that it continues to happen. So to recap, our 5 principles for building a community are to be collaborative, be open, be available, be inclusive, and be relentless. And although these principles came from our experience with the GovUK design system, we think that they're just as applicable to a community that sits around any of the products and services that you might be working on, not just design systems. Community is about bringing together people from different disciplines, roles, and backgrounds from different contexts to work on a shared goal. It's about helping people to feel part of something bigger. And investing time and effort in collaborating with your users and stakeholders helps to make products and services representative and useful. And we think that prioritising community and representation, even at the expense of short-term efficiency, is the key to successful collaboration. Thanks very much.